We walked out of that corner office, went on the parking lot, went into our car, slapped our doors, and then we both started screaming out of joy.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Alain, a very well welcome back to the Swisspreneur Show, 199 episodes after your very first episode. It's an honor and a pleasure at the same time to have you back here on the show. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be back, and a huge shout out to you and the team for taking what Chris and I started and really making it super successful in Switzerland and getting a lot of reach. I'm super proud of you and the team.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a lot of fun and a really dedicated and amazing team to
That's
work
great.
with. So we are just getting started, I have the feeling. So just a quick intro. Obviously, you are the founder of Swisspreneur, but you also founded and successfully sold Wildfire. You sold the company to Google in 2012. And today you are the founder and president at Prisma, where you basically change education for 4th to 9th graders. And today we want to do sort of a special episode, basically as an anniversary episode, if we want to call it that way, where we want to address the always burning questions that every startup and entrepreneur has. And let's just jump right into the first section. It's about the founding team. So what does the ideal founder team look like from your perspective and with your experience?
I think there's not just one formula. I think successful founding teams come in many different flavors. I think for me personally, I like two founders. It's kind of easier to go through the lows and more enjoyable to share the highs. I think in my mind, successful founding teams have very complementary skills. So I think you need to have at least one founder that's a rock star with product, ideally technical, an eye for design, and strategy. And then I think the other founder needs to be a marketing and sales machine. So I think these are the skills, the skills that you need to have as a founding team. And then I think you got to share, both founders got to share, got to be able to craft, need to be good at crafting a compelling vision and strategy for the company. They got to have similar values. And I think like one characteristic that's often underrated and is, I think, very important for me is that both founders need to have a very high ethical compass. It's kind of obvious, but often overlooked. So I think these are some of the skills you got to have to make your startup successful.
Right. And the next question is basically, where do I find the right co-founders? In your case, outside of your marriage, I would say. Do you have any tips for that?
Well, I think it's literally a marriage, so it doesn't really make a difference whether you're married or not. But I think I would go where there's like high talent density. So if you get into Stanford, Harvard, or MIT, I think that's certainly a good place to find your co-founder. If you don't get into a top program, try places like ODF, like On Deck Fellowship. That's kind of a new startup that's focused on building a Stanford in the cloud. Has very ambitious, driven, and smart young founders that are working on stuff. If you get into Y Combinator, that's a great place to find a co-founder. Or any breakout startup, like the Stripe or Airtable or Brex. There's actually a really great site called Breakout List, and they publish every year kind of the breakout startups. And I suggest you go and try to apply for one of these breakout startups. That's, I think, where you get the best chances to find a co-founder. I think Google, like big tech, Google, Facebook, Netflix, I think these are potentially also decent places, although you have people there that have kind of a little bit of a different risk profile. So I think I will put big tech at the bottom of my list.
Awesome tips. And, often a company also can start as a side hustle, as they often call it, as a side business. You still work on your day job, then you start playing around with ideas, you acquire your first customers. So the big question here that we often get is, when is the right time to go all in as a founder? Should that already be at the beginning from day one, or is there a perfect moment or a good moment to go all in as a founder?
I mean, I think it's great to kind of do it on the side initially when you kind of validate certain things, but then I think if your validation phase pans out positively and kind of confirms some of the assumptions you made, I think you got to go all in very quickly, because you want to give your startup your best chance, the best chances, and that requires like everything and more from you. So I think it's to me it's all in or nothing, because otherwise you don't give your startup the best chances to succeed.
Yeah, I fully support that take. Now we talked about the founding team. Equally important is, of course, also the business idea, what you're actually working on. So how can you tell if a business idea is a good one or not?
I personally start with my own problems. Like if I look back at my startups that I've started, I always was revolving around my own problems, trying to solve my own problems. That's kind of a good start, because you're your own customer, right? And then I think once I do have an idea that kind of addresses my own problem, then I go very quickly, I hone in and kind of evaluate whether my idea is focused on an inflection point, shifts in technology, shifts in user behavior, shifts in regulation. And kind of a good question to ask yourself is, why is now the right time to do this? Or in other words, why was this idea not possible 5 years ago? So I think that's, in my mind, has a lot to do with timing, and in my mind, one of the most important questions to ask yourself when you validate an idea. So I think that's kind of my top question, and then if I can get some very good answers to that question, then I go down and evaluate my idea further. I often figure out, is there a way to build a product or a service that's really 10x better than the status quo? Can I put together the right team with the right skill set? Is there an efficient way to go to market? Is the product or service that you're going to offer defensible in the long run? And do I have any sort of unfair advantage that potential competitors may not have? So I think these are just some of the questions that I ask myself, and that I kind of, it's like my checklist that I go through to figure out whether like an idea has potential.
You emphasize the importance of the why now question. How do you answer that question for Prisma?
I mean, Prisma, we can dive into that a little bit later in the interview, but I think education, especially K-12, but also higher ed, is like the pandemic really triggered, in my mind, like an inflection point of parents being open to alternative education models. And I think, although in the media, the main narrative was that like virtual learning was a disaster for kids, I think we're seeing a lot of families that are actually arguing the opposite, that virtual learning has been kind of a game changer for their child academically and socially too. And so I think there's kind of a shift in user behavior that I'd argue will be it's kind of this wave that's forming of parents that are less and less satisfied with the traditional education system and are trying alternatives.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, so people can also understand what you exactly meant by why is the timing right now. And in terms of the business idea, what role do market size and also market growth actually play? Is that something that you also look at, or are you really purely focused on your own problem?
I mean, I think there's startup opportunities in like markets that are big and existing, and then there are markets, there are non-consumption markets that don't exist yet, but or that are small, but have the potential to grow very fast and can become very big in the future. And I think there's opportunities in both markets. Either you're a small startup that can get into an existing market. I'd argue that's the harder thing to do. And then you can also address your startup or go into a non-consumption market that's growing fast. There's opportunities in both. I'd argue that kind of the latter has more potential, and there's more potential to build kind of breakout, groundbreaking startups.
Amazing. And you also mentioned the different questions that you ask yourself when you start playing around with an idea and basically the steps that you take. Are there any additional recommendations from your side when it comes to validating the business idea?
I mean, I think once you've kind of gone through that exercise, you want to go very quickly to actual potential customers and talk to them. And I think that's how you get additional data points to validate your business idea. I think the kind of the validation questions that I mentioned before, you can do this fairly quickly, but then kind of the more time intensive part can be to really reach out to potential customers and really understand, like, do they have the same problems as I do, and like really try to become a domain expert in that problem area. So I think that's kind of the next step that I normally do. Be very, very close to your customer.
And at a certain point in time, to also validate the idea, you might also build an MVP. From your experience, what actually makes a good MVP?
I mean, a good MVP, like in theory, is always kind of bare bone in terms of features and design, but provides a solution that captures the pivotal need that the customer has and hasn't had so far in the market. In other words, it has product market fit. So I think that's kind of a good MVP in my mind. It's always easy to say that because in my mind, that's probably the hardest thing to do, is to get your product or service to product market fit. And then I think once you go from like 0 to 1, like once you have product market fit and then you scale the company, I think there's known playbooks, but kind of getting to product market fit can be very, very challenging.
Yeah, I think that's a good topic. We can mix it here a bit because that would be the next topic that we also have on the list. What does product market fit actually mean? Like, how do you realize if you have product market fit or not?
I mean, it's really like it's pretty hard to kind of define. There's not really kind of a method to get to product market fit. It's a little bit kind of being being really good at product or developing the service, having the right intuition, and then being close to the customer and getting this feedback loop going. But I think signals that kind of show good product market fit are when you demo your product, your MVP, and customers are super excited. Or when I remember at Wildfire, like our app sometimes went down and customers became super angry with us. And that kind of shows like they really want and need the product. Or I remember we demoed Wildfire to early customers, and without even asking, they said like, how much does it cost? Like, can I pay for it? And then I think another signal is if it grows organically on an exponential curve. I think that these are, all signals that kind of show you, hey, you're onto something. I think another example from my Wildfire days is that we were working on our MVP, and we had the idea to do an early beta program for early customers. And so TechCrunch published an article about us, and the product was still in beta. And we just said like, hey, the first 100 customers that sign up get an invite. And we got like 5,000 signups.
Wow.
And so like we really felt like, hey, there's momentum and interest in the product. And so these are all signals that kind of show that you're onto product market fit. Kind of, if you want to read more about this topic, I think there's one blog post by Raul Vora, the founder of Superhuman. I think it's on the First Round Review blog, that kind of illustrates how he went through like a very rigorous process how to get to product market fit. So I'd recommend to read that. Paul Graham, like the founder of YC, wrote some essays on that topic. Sam Altman and Mark Andreessen wrote some articles too. So I'd recommend you read that. I think in addition to that, there's a product market fit survey by Sean Ellis. You go to pmfsurvey.com, and it kind of shows you a method and kind of provides you with a survey template that gets you to product market fit. So these are all like good background readings for founders who haven't found product market fit.
Yeah, amazing resources. Thank you for sharing them. So then after building the MVP, at one point you then have to actually build a real product out of that if you're progressing towards product market fit. So what's important when actually building a real product out or after the MVP phase?
I mean, I think during the MVP phase, there's a bunch of like, there's 2-3 engineers probably in a garage that are hacking together like an MVP, and then like once you have product market fit and you start getting more and more customers, you got to build your engineering, product, and design team, and you got to become kind of more process focused, not super heavy process, but like having kind of an agile method where you do sprints, whether they're like a week or 2 weeks long, doesn't really matter. And you create a backlog of features. You want to stay agile, but you also want to develop some kind of velocity on like how quickly you can jam out features. And I think there, the engineering team, the product team, and the design team need to work super closely together. I think I'd recommend that like these three components are very much embedded together, and I think it becomes more of a question how well you can oil your process in jamming out features.
Right. And in that regard, if you might not make any good progress towards product market fit, you also face the tough decision where you have to say, do I actually continue with my idea, or is it time to give up on my great idea? How do you determine whether you should give up or pivot your business idea or not?
I mean, I think, it's a really hard question because, there's so many examples of founders who've just stuck it out and then made it really big. And what if they would have stopped earlier? So I think that's a really tough question. But I'd say if you just consistently don't see demand, basically all the signals that I mentioned before, like if demand is not picking up, if customers don't want to pay you, or if you have a high churn rate, there might be something wrong. I think there's so many startups with great ideas, and like I think that timing question comes into play again. There's founders with great ideas, but they might be too early, or like they might be too late because competition is ahead of them. So I think there's so many factors, and it's probably one of the toughest questions to kind of figure out, like whether you want to pivot or continue or shut down. That's all I can say.
It's a fair take, and I think it also really shows the importance of timing that you mentioned before. Right. That's really something that we heavily underestimate as a founders, because we think we have the best product that we just built. It's so new, it's so good, but if the timing's not right, nobody cares.
Yep, absolutely. I agree.
In that regard, I also wonder about customer or buyer persona. That's also something that we get often asked. How do you actually figure out who your ideal customer or your customer persona is?
I think initially you want to focus on the power users. Like, I think if you, like, what's important driving product is that you get feedback from customers. And initially I often look at the power users. But that you don't, that the customer feedback really informs you and gives you an opinion about the product. I think the worst thing you can do is kind of to build everything your customers want. I think you gotta take the customer feedback and then really translate that into a very clear opinion, how the product should work and focus on, and then execute on that. I think some of the best products are very opinionated. So I think that's what's important in my opinion when it comes to customer personas.
Yeah, that's basically also your job as a founder, right? To have the clear opinion and see where the market or the product trend is going, so you can actually build it before people might even know that they want or need this.
Correct. I agree.
The other big struggle that we often hear from entrepreneurs is, how do I determine the right pricing for my product? I just wonder, how did you do that with Wildfire?
Yeah, I think, it was like, my recommendation is that you start charging from day one, because I think that's the best validation that you provide value, that your product provides value to the customer. And then I think my second recommendation is to keep it simple and kind of a no-brainer. We initially with Wildfire, we started going after small and mid-sized businesses, and we really wanted to make it a no-brainer to use our product, but we wanted to have it priced, we wanted to charge for it. So I think we really came up with that pricing on the fly. We said, Wildfire initially was a product where you were able to set up a social media marketing campaign based on a specific length. So the most basic plan was, I think, $5 setup fee and then a daily charge of 99 cents. So If like basically our opinion was, if you can't pay that as a business, we don't want you. And then on the other hand, businesses that were willing to pay for it, we wanted to make it a no-brainer and very affordable to use our product. So that's kind of how we approached it. Then once we grew and we developed the platform, etc., we started having an enterprise plan too, and we tried to like upgrade, like have various upgrade features like the standard SaaS businesses have nowadays. So I think that's how we approached it. Like, keep it simple, charge from day one. I feel that's kind of my recommendation.
And also a big takeaway here from my side is, like, if you then develop new features and you also build more value, that you then offer them in an upgrade, but don't just necessarily include them in the already cheap plan that you have in place.
Right,
so I think that's
right.
also good learning.
Totally agree.
So along the process, eventually you might also need some funds. You might want to get some investors on board. So the first question is actually, should I fundraise or should I bootstrap my company?
I mean, there's also no clear answer. I think it depends, right? I think if you have a product or service that has the potential to scale through technology, I think often it makes sense to raise some money. But if you have like a business that grows in a more linear fashion, then it's maybe worth to bootstrap. So I think it really depends on what business you have and the potential to scale. That's kind of my answer to that question.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. It really does depend. And now assume that we want to go for fundraising. When should I actually raise money? Is there a good timing or a good moment when I should start the process?
Well, I think you should start the process when you don't need the money. I think that's my recommendation. I think I see so many founders that look at the fundraising process as a transaction rather than a partnership. And so I feel almost from day one, you should start building your network with potential investors and approach them. And just once you have the idea and you've validated it, and maybe you have a prototype or maybe even some wireframes, you should go and knock on their door and get advice from them, because often angel investors and VCs are former founders, and they can provide you with some very valuable advice. And I think that's how you build a network of potential investors, and that's how you approach the fundraising process as a partnership rather than as a transaction, so that when you need the money, you know these people already, and you don't need to, it's not this kind of crazy, stressful process. So I think that's what I recommend. If you start off that kind of networking partnership process, I think it's important that you find, don't look at firms, look at partners in a VC partnership, and look at them, what their specialty is. I think a great place to look into this is angel.co or NFX Signal. It's a great database to kind of look at VCs and angel investors from all over the world, and you can segment them in various kind of industry verticals and interests. And then I think a new trend that I see emerge is that creators are becoming investors, because startups realize that traditional VCs, they don't necessarily have a lot of reach, whereas creators, super successful creators, have reach. And to some extent, it makes sense for creators to invest in your business, and then at the same time, you kind of get a marketing channel. So I think that's kind of a new trend I've noticed here in Silicon Valley. That's kind of emerging.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to replicate that here in Switzerland soon.
Yeah, maybe 5 years from now, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. So once you then identified the right investors, the partners at the firms that you're looking at, how do you actually reach out to them? Is there any best practice that you can recommend?
I mean, I think like email them. Like, don't write like a super long email. It needs to be kind of very succinct and to the point, because all these people are super busy. And just be authentic, just be yourself, and try to somehow stand out. So I think, and then I think obviously try to get to these people through your network. Do you have any friends or any contacts that know these people? So personal intros go a long way. So I think that's how I'd suggest you approach kind of the first contact.
Right. And what's a good fundraising story from your perspective? Or ask differently, how do you get their attention in that email?
Yeah, I mean, a fundraising story, I mean, I can't speak for others, but like our fundraising story for what, so my first venture was a travel business that was kind of more a linear business. We didn't raise any funds there. It was all bootstrapped. My second venture was Wildfire. There it was kind of a very unusual path. We self-funded initially. We had our own savings, and then my parents put, I think, $20,000 into the business, and then we managed to kind of get to an MVP, and we were lucky with timing that we, like, Wildfire was initially sitting, kind of leveraging the Facebook platform as a marketing channel. And we were lucky at the time that Facebook was very interested in having developers build apps on top of their Facebook platform. So they gave us a $250,000 grant, not equity investment, just a grant. So nice. We were able, with these $250,000, we were able to get the business to cash flow positive. And then when you have a cash flow positive business here in Silicon Valley, it's a small place, and word got around the VC world that we're kind of this tiny startup, cash flow positive, growing fast, and so VC started knocking on our door without us reaching out. And then I think the unusual path we took to is that we basically skipped the VC round. We went straight to private equity. We decided not to go do our Series A with a VC firm, but with a private equity firm, because the founder terms were favorable, and we really liked the general partner there. So that was my fundraising story, and I think through that process, we were able to retain the majority of ownership and until the very end, until we sold the business. So that was an unusual story, but it kind of worked out. And then with Prisma, we haven't raised any money. We got a lot of interest from VCs, but we're self-funding for now. And who knows? We'll see whether it makes sense to get some funding at some point. But for now, we're fine. So
Amazing.
So as you can see, I think fundraising can yield a successful outcome in various different ways. So there's no silver bullet.
Water damage or a fire in the office building can mean the end of your startup if you're not properly insured. Whether I'm just starting a new company or growing fast, the topic of insurance is often not a top priority. And that's totally fine. Yet, it's hugely important to be properly covered here. On a personal recommendation, I turned to the insurance broker WSR Partner with my first company. The advice is highly professional and completely independent. As an expert, WSR Partner understands the situation of my startup and obtains quotes from various insurance companies so that I can choose the best offer. They are paid directly by the insurance companies. There were no costs for me at all. Because we work with Alex and the team of WSR Partner, we offer you a free consultation. Get independent and professional advice, whether for startups or an insurance check for established companies. Book your free appointment now at www.swisspreneur.org/WSR. Right, but I think for me, the biggest takeaway here of your story is really money follows traction. So you had significant traction, you were cash flow positive. So then you don't even need to worry that much about finding investors. Focus on building a good business, building traction, and then it will be so much easier to raise money if you don't have any traction yet.
Yes, correct.
The big question here is also, you skipped the VC round, but what would you recommend? How much should I raise and how much equity should I give up as a founder? I know this heavily depends on the business case and everything, but if I do my first round, what do you think is like a good amount there to give up equity wise?
Yeah, I mean it's really hard, but I think and probably varies also in Europe versus the US, etc. But and it's probably better to ask a VC that question. But I've heard anything between 5 and 20% in your seed round, depending where the business is at, how seasoned the founders team is. And then it's often, my recommendation is to often kind of have like raise 50% more money than you actually need, because you want to secure your runway and make sure the money lasts until your next round. So it's good to raise more, like 50% more money. That's kind of my rule of thumb. But yeah, I think I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Fair point. Now, let's also focus on a different topic that is super important, growth and culture. If people Google for Wildfire and if they look at your YouTube videos when you actually announced the acquisition by Google, I think people, even not being involved in your business, can tell you had a very strong company culture. So how do you best shape your company values and also culture as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Wildfire, we just did it. We never took a very kind of we didn't take a very rigorous approach to defining company values and company vision and strategy, etc. And we really felt that at some point when we were like 200 people or like at kind of at that size, that was lacking. But like to have a clear vision, a strategy, company values. But I think we just did it by doing at Wildfire. And in retrospect, that's, I think, one thing I would do differently at Wildfire to really almost from day one to very clearly define 3 to 5 company values. And I think they should be very much aligned with who you are at the founder, because at the end of the day, in my mind, everything culturally trickles from the top down. And so to me, it's like defining 3 to 5 very clear and concise company values that are authentic to you as a founder. And then you implement a mechanism that's aligned, like kind of a bold mechanism that's aligned with your values. So let me give you an example. One of my mentors at Wildfire was the first VP of engineering at Amazon. And he worked obviously very closely with Jeff Bezos. And for Jeff Bezos, like one of the key company values for Amazon was to frugality, because if the organization is frugal, then they can pass on these cost savings to the customer. And so what Jeff did was he built desks. You probably heard that story. He built desks out of doors from Home Depot. And so he built that desk for himself. And then every new employee that joined the company had to build their own desk with a Home Depot door. And so that kind of, it's kind of a mechanism that he used to really kind of anchor that value of frugality. And the more you can do that around your company values, I think the more ingrained the values will be.
Yeah, I think that's much, much stronger than just putting posters on the wall, to really live it and lead by example in that regard.
Exactly.
When you did hiring at Wildfire, also in your other companies, what is more important to you? Do you hire for skills or for culture fit?
I mean, I think in an ideal case, it's not one or the other. It's like skills and culture.
Right.
But when you grow really fast, that's kind of always a trade-off. But yeah, I think you want to hire for skill and culture, because I think I think in almost every case where we just hired for one or the other, it somehow didn't work out in the long run. And I think both, you got to have a very skilled person, but then you got to have also someone that fits in culturally. And if one of these two don't apply, then it's really tough to build a good team.
Right. Did you have any favorite sort of source of hiring the good talent? Like, did you work closely with universities or any other places where you hire people from?
Yeah, great question. I think what we did, we got a lot of referrals from existing employees. Like over 50% of employees came through referrals. We kind of had we set up a referral program. We also very early hired our internal recruiting team. I think one of the advantages of having your internal recruiting team is that they really know your company, and they can screen for skill and culture. Whereas if you work with recruiting firms, they just want to get their commission. They don't really care about cultural fit, nor they just want to transact, right? So I think these two, like focusing on referrals from employees and building your own internal recruiting team, is a great way to build a team that's aligned with values, with your culture and skills you need.
Before, you already mentioned something that you would do differently today, looking back at the Wildfire story. So I also wonder, what are the biggest challenges when scaling up a company, and how did you solve them at Wildfire, or in general, in terms of hiring, growth, and culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you grow a team, like initially you're kind of a bunch of engineers in a garage and everyone does everything, right? Like you wear a lot of different hats, but then when you grow, you become bigger and you gotta specialize. People gotta specialize in certain things, and I think three challenges that arise when your team grows is how well you can communicate across the team, decision making, how are decisions made, and kind of disseminating common knowledge across the org. And I think there's no there's no clear way. It's all about organizational design. And organizational design is never, like, I've never seen an organizational design that's perfect. So it's kind of always evolving, and you got to adapt it as the company grows. I think what's different today than back when we did Wildfire is that there are a lot of people that have given great advice on how to scale an organization. I think there's some great books to read, like Ben Horowitz from A16Z, like The Hard Things About Hard Things. He gives some great advice in that book. There's a guy called Elad Gil that wrote the High Growth book, I think it's called.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot of great practices, best practices in these books, and I'd advise to kind of read these books as a founder. I think there's a lot of other resources nowadays, but I think I'd start with these two books.
Yeah, again, amazing resources, recommendations. Perfect. We're going to put all of that in the show notes so people can actually follow and look at them. Now, the last part of the entrepreneurial journey is basically the exit. Of course, we also want to talk about the exit. So what makes my company attractive for a potential buyer? You went through that process. So how do you experience that?
I mean, I think they like great exits, like companies are bought, not sold. So I think if you need to engage an investment bank to go and knock on everyone's door, that's maybe the wrong, like you don't always have the luxury to kind of have a lot of interest from potential acquirers. But I think in general, you get the most successful exits when your startup is scarce and you're one of the only ones that like offers that product or service. And so and you do something that's strategically important for a potential acquirer. And so I think that's the situation that we were in at Wildfire. We've kind of built this social media marketing platform, and there were like two other big companies, two competitors. They got bought up before us by Salesforce and Oracle, and then there were like a bunch of other companies, large acquirers that were looking for a social media marketing platform, and Google was one of them. And then there was a bidding war, and that drove up the price, and so that's kind of the ideal scenario you want to be in if you want to sell your company, and so that kind of yields a successful exit, in my opinion. If no one's knocking on your door from an acquirer and you need to engage an investment bank to kind of get your business sold, that's probably not necessarily the best approach, in my opinion.
Right. And then with all that interest that was there, you still had to face decision, should I sell or should I not? So when is it a good time to sell, and when is it better to stay on and not sell?
Yeah. I mean, I think in our instance, we were kind of like at the crossroads. Do we stay independent? And I mean, we were talking to investment banks about going public at the time. We were kind of at the crossroads. Do we stay independent and potentially become a consolidator ourselves and become kind of a large marketing platform? Or do we combine forces with like an acquirer and realize the vision through having a platform of a bigger company? And I think, I mean, to be very honest, we were tired and kind of burned out from 4 years of growing a company from like two people to 400 people. And we looked at the landscape too, of like how the forces evolve in that social media marketing landscape, and we thought it would be a better move to combine forces with Google. And then I think we talked to many potential acquirers, and Google was by far the big standout. I'm not sure whether we would have sold if Google wouldn't have knocked on our door. Because to us, Google was culturally kind of a really good fit. They were very product focused, very visionary, and I think at the end of the day, it was the right decision.
Wow, I love these background stories. I think it's amazing to sort of join that with the lessons learned and the additional experience that you can share. That's amazing. Then when you actually had the negotiations, what's important to consider besides the pure price in such an exit deal? So what were the important things that you also had to look at and negotiate?
I think I might have told you the story before, but we were, it was kind of surreal with Wildfire. We had a number, like the process with Google went super fast. I think they called us up on a Thursday evening, expressing interest and requesting a meeting the next morning, and with like corp dev. We met with them. They seemed to like what they saw, and then they wanted to, like Susan Wojcicki, who's now leading YouTube, reached out to us personally, requesting a meeting on a Sunday, which was even for Silicon Valley was fairly unusual. And then that meeting went well, and then we heard from Nikesh Arora, which was at the time the COO, and he invited us to a meeting too. And I think at that time we knew they would give us an offer. So I remember we entered this boardroom or corner office of Nikesh, and he was sitting there with the corp dev person. He kind of the corp dev person slipped us over a one-pager where they presented their offer. And I remember I kind of skimmed through, and before the meeting, my wife and I, we kind of talked about like, okay, we would sell at X if it would be higher than X. And I kind of skimmed through the one pager they gave us, and it was more than 2x the price. And you know, like on the outside, you got to stay cool and say, hey, no big deal. We got to think about it, etc. And on the inside, you say like, holy shit, like this is surreal. And I don't remember much from that meeting, but I remember we walked out of that corner office, went on the parking lot, went into our car, slapped our doors, and then we both started screaming out of joy. And so that was kind of our experience, our acquisition experience. That was great. That was kind of a great memory that sticks in my mind. The other thing was when we announced it to the team, because I think the whole process was, there were maybe 5 people that knew about the transaction. And then I think once we were done with due diligence, I think that went 3 weeks, and then it came to the announcement. So we sent out an email saying, hey, we want to do an all hands, sent out an email to the whole team saying we want to organize an all hands and have an announcement. And so we kind of got the whole team together, and one of our 5 people that was in the loop put together this great kind of animated presentation with music that kind of went through the whole history of Wildfire. And at the end, there was kind of this logo that was zoomed in, Wildfire plus Google. And then everyone kind of jumped up and started screaming out of joy. And I think to me, that was the most emotional and the greatest experience from that whole sales process, to kind of see the confirmation from the team that everyone was really excited to join Google. So I think that's kind of my personal story. I think, I mean, obviously, kind of the financial outcome is important for the investors and for yourself too. But I think that's almost secondary. You want to make sure that once you're acquired and you start integrating, etc., like your team gels culturally with the acquirer too, because I think then you set yourself up for long-term success within a bigger entity. So that was a long story, but I hope the audience can enjoy it.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And by the way, I think that YouTube video is still online. So just
exactly.
Look for Wildfire Google acquisition, right?
Yes, correct. I was the guy that was kind of recording the video, and I was kind of all jittery because I was quite emotional too. So the footage is not ideal.
But still, people get a good impression about what happened on that day.
Right.
And, you know, that amount of money is also life-changing for you on a personal level. So what do you do with the money after the exit?
Good question. I mean, I think we didn't change. We didn't want to change our lifestyle a lot. I mean, I still have a Nissan Leaf, and I think like what we did is we set up our own investment fund, where we manage investments. So we do a lot of kind of Warren Buffett style, um, d- directly investing in kind of high quality assets, publicly traded at attractive prices. We've kind of partnered up with someone that is a rock star at that, and we kind of created our own family office. So that's one, and we have about 99% of our assets in kind of these kind of Warren Buffett style investments. We own about between 15 to 25, 30 stocks at the time, like, are in our portfolio. And yeah, that person has done incredibly well. I mean, it's been now almost 10 years, and like the performance has been outstanding. I think on a like net IRR over the last 9 years was like 15.4%, and over the last 5 years was like over 23 or 24%.
Crazy.
So that's been great. And then I'll take we're taking kind of a very kind of 1% of our wealth, of our money, and we allocate it to very risky projects like Prisma or Bitcoin or other like few startups that we've invested in. So I think that's kind of what we've done so far.
Sounds like a nice dumbbell portfolio.
And I must say we're also philanthropically involved. We give a lot of money away to people who really need it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful side if you can do that to also make it happen. So another important part that I also want to talk about is the personal aspect. You mentioned that, at the end when you received the acquisition offers, you're also sort of burnt out and exhausted a bit because 4 years of building a fast growing and highly profitable company is basically a lot of work and can really like take a lot of hours and effort from your side. So what also kept you going in those tough times? And I'm sure you had plenty of them along the road of wildfire. So what really motivated you in the difficult times to keep going, to keep pushing?
I mean, having a great co-founder helps a lot. So I think we often balanced each other out. When Victoria had a tough time, I helped her to get over it. And when I had a tough time, she helped me. So I think that helps. Having a clear vision for your company helps to kind of have always the North Star where we are heading, even if you face short-term challenges. Not like, not necessarily only being focused on financial gain. If you're just doing it for financial gain, then kind of at the first road bump, you may give up. And then I think as an entrepreneur, you gotta have grit and perseverance. I think for me, I like over the years, I started realizing that like my mental state is very much correlated with how much I sleep. Like getting a good night of sleep can do wonders. And then one other thing that I've noticed, kind of in the recent years, I do a lot of, I mean, it sounds silly, but like I do a lot of sauna and cold plunge, and it has an amazing effect on my mental state too. It just puts me immediately in a good mood. So I think these are, and then I work out a lot. Like I work out 5 times a week at least, and try to stay in shape. So and eat well, etc. So these are all some hacks that I use to get through tough times.
Just a quick follow-up question there. How many hours of sleep did you get when you were building Wildfire, and how many hours of sleep do you get now?
Not much. I back in the Wildfire days, I I mean, there were times where I had like 3, 4 hours sleep a night. I was also much younger then. Um, I think now I really notice if I get anything less than 6, 7 hours of sleep, I can really feel it during the day. And my ideal time is like 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Um, and I'm kind of a little bit of a biohacker. I measure how much I sleep, how much deep sleep, how much REM sleep, etc. I have like this special mattress called 8 Sleep that cools down my bed at an ideal temperature and kind of adapts. So I'm a little bit extreme with this kind of stuff, but I try to optimize everything I can to get the ideal sleep.
I mean, in the end, it's pretty simple, right? If you take good care of yourself, you're going to perform at the higher level. So it's pretty simply correlated to the success of your company to a certain degree.
Correct.
Another question, often you face big life decisions like who your partner is, what you work on, but also where you live. And where should you live as a founder in 2021, 2022?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, with this pandemic, more than ever, you can live wherever you want and you can hire from wherever the best talent is. But I still think, if you're a first-time founder, I still think it's of advantage to be in a hub, in a startup hub. The nice thing nowadays is that Silicon Valley is not the only option. You have startup hubs all over the US, all over Europe and Asia. And my recommendation is that you spend most of your time in a startup hub, but it's also okay to go and work remotely for a little while and then return to the startup hub. So I think being in a hub has huge advantages of being close to investors, being close to talent, being close to partners, and being on the pulse. So I think I'd still recommend to be in a hub, but it doesn't really matter where.
Okay, so if you had to pick 3 hubs for 2022, which cities would you choose?
I'd still like the Bay Area is ground zero still. I personally I like Europe. I like being in Europe, being from Switzerland. I spent the whole summer in Zurich this year and really enjoyed meeting founders and kind of getting plugged into the startup system, like ecosystem there. I think Berlin. I love Berlin. And then my wife is from New Zealand, so we spent quite a bit of time in Auckland. That's also a great place, and there's more and more startups that are popping up there. So that I think these are some of my favorites that I choose.
Amazing. And we already mentioned in the intro, currently you are working at Prisma, building Prisma, where you changed the education for 4th to 9th graders. So of course, we also want to briefly talk about that. So from your perspective, what is broken in our education system today that we need Prisma today?
I think we could probably do a whole separate episode about this topic, but let me try to be brief. But so my wife and co-founder and I have assembled an incredible team to build the school of the future called Prisma, and that kind of builds from the ground up a digital first school. And what Prisma does differently from traditional schools is the following. Prisma adapts to every child's individual abilities and interests, to every family's unique lifestyle, and we're laser focused on preparing kids for the future. And we're still very small because we've only launched 13 months ago, but we've seen incredible academic growth in kids. We have we receive great feedback from parents. So we regularly measure like net promoter scores. And the last net promoter score was 81, which is considered world class. So we're doing a lot of things right. I think what we're focused on in the coming months and years is to scale this venture. And it's a very complex business because it's not just a software product. It's a service that we provide that we enhance through technology, and so we're basically trying to integrate curriculum, top-notch educators with community and a software platform, and that's very hard to do. So we're working on that, and so yeah, planning to scale that over the coming months and years. That's kind of where we're at. Like, as to like what I think is broken with the existing education system. So when my wife and I started having kids, we have 3 kids. They're still very young, and like our oldest one is in first grade. We started kind of, as probably almost all parents do, you look at schools here in the US. We've basically looked at every single school that's available. And what's a little bit different from Europe is that here in the US, you have kind of this vast, like you have so many choices. You have almost too many choices with schools. And when we looked at these schools here in the Bay Area, there were some very good schools and some not so good schools. And the very good schools, they were often very small and very expensive, so inaccessible to most people. And then they were still not quite, they were not doing what we were looking for in an ideal education. So we kind of took a step back, looked at education in more general here in the US, and started realizing how broken it is. We started asking ourselves the question, in a world where we work and engage with people across the globe, does it still make sense to send kids to like hyper local schools with others just like them, or kind of in a world where technology allows kids to learn exactly at the pace that's right for them? Does it still make sense to kind of have standardized curriculum, or in a world where people can work from anywhere in the world and can live a flexible lifestyle, does it still make sense for schools to have like a super rigid schedule and be tied down to a geography? So I think these are all some questions that we ask ourselves, and we looked at the existing education system and we felt we're broken. And if you think about it, like if you look over the last 100 years, our lives in terms of how we shop, how we entertain ourselves, how we work has changed so much over the last 100 years. But if you look at the education system, it hasn't, at its core, it hasn't changed much. And I think we're trying to address some of these problems.
I think it's wonderful because it also is sort of a great summary of what we just discussed, right? What really comes to mind is solving your own problems and also thinking about why is the timing right now. And I think that's a beautiful way to sort of go to the last section of today's interview, to some rapid fire questions for you.
Sure, I'm ready.
Perfect. So the first one, salary, commission, or equity?
Definitely equity.
Then the next one, growth or profitability?
It depends. I think, as we discussed before, like growth for venture-backed companies and profitability for bootstrapped companies.
And if you had a choice between founder or investor, what would your ideal job look like?
Well, founder, definitely founder. I'm always on the side of the builder and the founder, and I think founders make anyways way better investors.
Nice. And do you have any favorite advice that you would give to your 20-year-old self?
I don't think I would change too much. I think my advice would be to to skip, after college, I went to investment banking, kind of did a fairly traditional path. I should have skipped that and gone straight to the startup world. Start earlier. That's what my advice would be.
Nice. And the very last question for you today, New Zealand, United States, or Switzerland?
That's a tough question. I think New Zealand for the natural beauty, the United States for the entrepreneurial spirit, and Switzerland for family, snowboarding, and the amazing bread and pastry culture.
I think we can all live with that. That's perfect. Alain, thank you so much, first of all, for building Swisspreneur and for all the support you've given us over the past years. It's really amazing to count on you and just great to see what you've built here. And also for taking the time today. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure that this was not the last podcast episode that we did with you.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's amazing what you guys have built, and I'm super excited to be on show episode number 200.
This episode was brought to you by Swisspreneur's main partner, Clara Business, the digital all-in-one solution for small businesses. Managing internal processes manually and on paper wastes an incredible amount of time. That's why Clara digitizes everything, allowing you to focus on what really matters, your core business. Go to clara.ch to find out how your business administration can be simpler, faster, and more efficient. Again, that's clara.ch.